The cowboy named Wade was born with a gift that felt more like a sentence. He could lay his hands on any injured horse and pull its pain into his own flesh. A broken leg became his broken leg. A deep gash became his bleeding wound. Wade healed dozens of horses, but carried every fracture and fever in his tired bones. He never told anyone because people would call him a liar or a freak or both. A veterinarian named Prairie came to vaccinate his cattle and saw a horse with a shattered hoof. Wade knelt beside the animal and whispered something she could not hear through the barn noise. The horse stopped groaning and stood up while Wade collapsed with his face twisted in silence. Prairie ran to him and found his left foot swollen exactly where the horse's hoof had been damaged. "What did you do?" She screamed, and Wade coughed and said, "I fixed the horse. Leave it alone." Prairie grabbed his face and said, "You took its fracture into your own body. How long have you done this?" Wade whispered, "Since I was 12. My father's stallion broke its back. I took the break. My father never knew." She wept because he had been breaking himself for animals that could not thank him for 30 years. Prairie stayed at his ranch and watched him heal 3 more horses over the following weeks. Each time, Wade would groan and shake, and new bruises would bloom on his ribs or shoulders. She begged him to stop, and he said, "If I stop, they suffer. I was born to be their bandage." Prairie said, "You were born to be loved too, but you are using up your body like a paper towel." Wade laughed bitterly, and his laugh turned into a cough that tasted like old blood and iron. She drove to town and researched his condition in medical journals, but found nothing like his gift. Prairie returned with painkillers and bandages and said, "I cannot stop you, but I can hold you after." That night, a pregnant mare went into labor, and the foal was stuck, and the mother screamed in agony. Wade placed both hands on the mare's flank, and the foal slid free while Wade's abdomen cramped violently. He fell to the hay, and Prairie saw the outline of a tiny hoof pressing against his stomach from inside. The foal was breech. "You took that too," she whispered, and he nodded with tears leaking from his closed eyes. Prairie pressed her hands over his belly and felt the hoof shape slowly dissolve as his body absorbed the trauma. She held him until sunrise, and he whispered, "No one has ever stayed after. They usually run." Prairie said, "I am not running. I am learning, and I am going to find a way to take your pain too." Wade shook his head and said, "My gift does not work in reverse. I can give, but I cannot receive." She said, "Then I will not take your pain. I will share it. What you feel, I will feel beside you." Over the next year, Prairie learned to read his body like a map of every horse he had ever healed. His left knee ached when a mare's tendon healed. His right shoulder burned when a stallion's rib mended. She would massage his muscles and whisper, "This is the racehorse from 2 weeks ago. He is running now because of you." Wade would cry because no one had ever named his suffering as something noble instead of strange. One evening, he came back from a neighbor's ranch with a deep gash on his forearm from a barbed wire cut. The neighbor's horse had torn its leg, and Wade had transferred the wound to himself without hesitation. Prairie stitched his arm and said, "You cannot save every horse in Montana. You will bleed out before you are 50. Wade looked at her and said, "Then I will bleed out happy because I spent my last drop on something that could not speak for itself." She kissed his forehead and said, "You are the most beautiful fool I have ever met, and I'm going to marry you so I can bandage you forever." Wade proposed to her on the same barn floor where she had first seen him collapse with a horse's broken hoof in his bones. He said, "I have nothing to offer but a broken body and a heart that hurts for creatures who cannot hurt back." Prairie said, "That is everything. That is the whole point of love. You give and I will hold what you give." They got married in the barn with every horse he had ever healed standing in a circle around them like witnesses. The horses were old and scarred, and some limped, but they all looked at Wade with eyes that remembered his hands. Prairie wrote her vows on a bandage and said, "You have taken 1,000 wounds. Now let me be the gauze that never leaves." Wade wrote his vows on a horseshoe and said, "I will keep taking pain because that is who I am. But now I will come home to you after." Their first dance was a slow shuffle because his knees were bad from an old stallion's arthritis he had absorbed years ago. Prairie did not mind. She held him upright and whispered, "You are the strongest man I know, and your strength is soft." They had no children because Wade's body was too damaged, but they adopted rescue horses and called them their family. Every morning, Prairie checked his body for new bruises and asked, "Whose pain is this?" And he would tell her the story. She kept a journal of every horse he had healed, and the wounds he had taken, and the dates of his quiet heroism. When Wade turned 60, a young colt broke its leg, and Wade knelt to heal it, and his own leg snapped instead. The colt ran free, but Wade's femur shattered, and Prairie drove him to the hospital with her hands shaking on the wheel. The doctors put pins in his bone and said he would never walk without a cane again. Wade smiled and said, "Worth it." Prairie cried in the parking lot, and he held her and said, "Every limp I have is a horse that is still galloping somewhere." She looked at him and said, "And every limp you have is a reason I fell in love with you. You are made of sacrifice." They grew old together, and Wade's body became a patchwork of old fractures and healed scars and borrowed pains. Prairie never stopped bandaging him, and he never stopped taking wounds from horses that arrived at his gate. One winter, a blind mare was brought to him with a tumor in her belly, and Wade placed his hands on her soft fur. He absorbed the tumor and fell to the ground with his own abdomen swelling, and Prairie knew this was different. The mare lived, but Wade's body could not fight the cancer because cancer was not a wound, it was a thief. Prairie held him in the hospital bed and he whispered, "I have no regrets. Every tumor I took was a life I gave back." She said, "You gave so much. Let me give you this one thing. Let me stay until the end." Wade died at 68 with Prairie's hand on his chest and the barn horses whinnying outside his window. She buried him in the pasture where the first horse he ever healed still grazed at 29 years old. The gravestone reads, "He took their pain. She took his hand. Together they proved that love is the only wound worth keeping." Every year, horse owners leave bandages at his grave, thanking the cowboy who limped so their horses could run. Prairie survived him by 10 years and died in the same barn with her face turned toward the stall where he used to sleep. Their story spread across Montana as proof that some people are born to suffer for others, but they do not have to suffer alone. If you have been carrying pain that is not yours, find someone who will bandage you without asking you to stop being generous. Subscribe to Stories Hub, official, for more emotional Western romances about the healers who need healing and the love that holds them. Share this video with someone who has taken on too much, and remind them that sharing the weight is not weakness, it is grace.